She looked right at me, my own daughter, and said it like she was reading the weather. Figure it out yourself. My mother was 82 years old. She had fallen in the kitchen. Her hip was on fire. The phone was still warm against my ear, and my daughter had already hung up. That silence after the click was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. To understand how we got there, how my own flesh and blood could say those words about the woman who taught her to tie her shoes, I need to take you back about 8 months. Back to when things were still good, or at least when I still believe they were. My name is Thomas Arthur Graves. I am 67 years old. I live in a town called Millbrook in the hill country of eastern Tennessee. Population just under 4,000, depending on who you ask and whether old Dale Fincher is still counting his barn cats on the census. I drive a 1994 Ford F-150 that has more rust than pride, but starts every morning without complaint. I have a Labrador named Bo who follows me room to room like I owe him money. I eat the same breakfast every day at the Pinewood Diner on Chestnut Road. 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, black coffee. Martha behind the counter stopped asking my order 11 years ago. I sit in the same booth. 4th from the door, left side, back to the wall. That is not a habit, that is training, but I will get to that later. Most folks in Millbrook know me as the quiet man who fixes things. Leaky faucets, crooked fence posts, a stuck screen door for the widow on Birch Lane. I show up, I fix the thing, I leave. Nobody in Millbrook knows where I actually spent 26 years of my life, and I prefer it that way. Helen would have understood. Helen always understood everything before I did. That was the specific gift she carried through 41 years of marriage. She could read a room the way most people read a newspaper. She would look at someone for 10 seconds and know exactly what they were hiding. I used to joke that the government should have recruited her instead of me. She would smile and say, they tried, but the dental plan was terrible. She died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that does not negotiate. By the time Dr. Sullivan in Knoxville confirmed what we already suspected, she had 11 months. She used every single one of them. She organized the photo albums. She wrote letters to Grace, our daughter, one for every birthday through age 50. She sealed them in envelopes and stored them in a shoebox in the hallway closet with a note on top that read, "Open one per year and do not cheat because I will know." That was Helen. Even dying, she was planning ahead for the people she loved. The house went quiet after she passed. Not empty, quiet. There is a difference. Empty means nothing is there. Quiet means everything is there, but it has stopped speaking. I still made coffee every morning for 2 cups because my hands did not know how to make just one. I still reached across the bed at 3 in the morning and found nothing but cold sheets and the smell of lavender lotion on the nightstand. Helen had a saying. She said it to Grace when Grace was small. She said it to me when I came home from places I could not name. She said it to strangers at church and neighbors at the grocery store. You can always tell who a person really is by how they treat someone who cannot do a single thing for them. I did not fully understand that sentence until the night my daughter hung up the phone on her own grandmother, but I am getting ahead of myself again. Grace Ellen Graves, my only child, born on a Tuesday in April, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, with lungs that could rattle the windows in the maternity ward. She was Helen made over. Same sharp eyes. Same stubborn jaw that meant she had already made up her mind and you were wasting your breath arguing. She grew up in Millbrook, studied business at the State University, got a job at a marketing firm in Knoxville, and built a life Helen and I were quietly proud of. She called every Sunday. She came home for every holiday. She brought flowers to her mother's grave on the 1st of every month, rain or shine. That was Grace. That was always Grace, until Victor. Victor Allen Drake was 36 years old when he walked into my daughter's life. He was a real estate developer from Nashville. Tall, well-dressed, confident in a way that makes you notice the confidence before you notice the person. He drove a black car that cost more than my house. He wore watches that told you the time and also told you how much money he had. He shook my hand the first time we met like he was closing a deal. I wanted to like him. I need you to understand that. I wanted it to work. Grace was 34. She had been alone for a while after a long relationship ended quietly, and when she brought Victor home for Thanksgiving dinner 8 months ago, the light in her eyes was something I had not seen since before her mother died. So I tried. I made him welcome. I opened the good bourbon. I showed him the property. I asked about his work and listened to him explain square footage and investment returns and market projections with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loved what he did. And I will say this because it matters. There was a moment early on that made me think maybe this man was real. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner. Grace had gone inside to call a friend. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked out at the tree line where the last of the daylight was turning the oaks into copper. He said quietly, almost to himself, "My father never had a place like this. We grew up in an apartment in Memphis, 4 of us in 2 rooms. I used to fall asleep listening to traffic. His voice was different when he said it, softer, younger. For just a second, I saw the boy inside the man, and something in my chest loosened. Maybe he was real. Maybe I was wrong to be cautious. But you know what I have learned in 67 years of living and 26 years of reading people for a living? The moments that make you lower your guard are the ones you should pay the most attention to. Because what came after that evening unraveled slowly, quietly, like thread being pulled from a hem you did not know was loose. The first time was small. Christmas Eve, 6 months ago. The whole family was at my house. Grace, Victor, my mother, Eleanor, 82 years old, sharp as a blade and twice as patient. My cousin Robert and his wife Anna drove down from Virginia. We were sitting around the table after dinner. Eleanor was telling a story about my father, a story she had told 100 times about the night he proposed at the county fair and dropped the ring into a funnel cake. Everyone laughed. Everyone always laughed, except Victor. He leaned over to Grace, not quite whispering, and said, "That is adorable, but does she always repeat the same stories?" He said it with a smile. He said it like it was a gentle observation, but I saw my mother's face. She heard it. She did not react. She just kept talking. But I saw the flicker. I saw the tiny flinch at the corner of her mouth, and something in me went very still. A man who mocks an old woman's memories in her own family's home is telling you exactly who he is. Most people are just too polite to listen. The second time was in January. Victor came down for the weekend. He walked through the front door, looked at the living room, and said, "You know, Thomas, a fresh coat of paint and some updated furniture would really open this place up. I could give you the number of a guy who does staging." He was not being cruel. He was being Victor. Offering solutions to problems nobody asked him to solve. Treating my home, the home Helen and I built with our hands, the home where my daughter took her first steps, like a property listing that needed improvement. I smiled and said, "I will think about it." I did not think about it. The third time was subtle, but it cut deeper than the others. February. Grace came to visit alone, without Victor, for the first time in months. She was quieter than usual. She laughed at things a half second too late, the way people do when they are performing happiness instead of feeling it. I made her breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the same view she had looked at her entire childhood, and for just a moment her face went completely still, like a mask had slipped and underneath it was someone very tired. "Dad," she said, "do you think I ask for too much?" I set down the spatula. "No." I said it before I even thought about it. "Why?" She shook her head. "Never mind. Victor says I have unrealistic expectations about how people should treat me." She said it like she was quoting a textbook, like the words belonged to someone else. My hands went tight around the edge of the counter. A man who teaches a woman to doubt her own worth is not building a relationship. He is building a cage. The fourth time was in March. We were at a restaurant in Knoxville. Grace, Victor, my mother, and me. A birthday dinner for Eleanor. 82 years of living, and the woman still insisted she did not want a fuss, but she wore her good pearl earrings, so we all knew the truth. The server was a young woman, maybe 20, nervous, clearly new. She brought Victor's steak medium instead of medium rare, an honest mistake. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He simply looked at her, held the plate out with one hand, and said, "This is not what I ordered, and I would appreciate it if you could get it right." His tone was ice, controlled, precise, dismissive. The server's face went red. Her hands shook, taking the plate back. Nobody at the table said anything. Grace looked down at her napkin. My mother looked at me just once, just long enough. I knew what that look meant, because Helen used to give me the same one. It meant, "Are you seeing this?" I was seeing it. The fifth time broke something I could not put back together. April, a warm Saturday afternoon. I drove to Knoxville to surprise Grace with a box of Helen's old recipe cards I had found in the attic. I wanted her to have them. I knocked on the apartment door. It opened. Grace stood there in a long-sleeved shirt on a day that was pushing 85 degrees. She hugged me, and when she pulled back, the sleeve rode up just enough. A bruise on her forearm. Not large, not dramatic, the kind that could come from a dozen innocent explanations. But the way she pulled the sleeve down, fast, automatic, practiced, that was not innocent. That was a woman who had learned to hide things without thinking about it. I did not say anything. Not then. I handed her the recipe cards. She cried when she saw her mother's handwriting. And I stood in that doorway, holding my daughter while she wept over her dead mother's cursive, and something behind my ribs turned to stone. If this story is already doing something to you, if you can feel the weight of it building, then I am asking you to stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep finding the people who need to hear them. You being here matters more than you know. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark in Millbrook and stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment. The whispered comment at Christmas, the staging suggestion, the unrealistic expectations, the servers shaking hands, the bruise. Each one alone could be explained away. Together they formed a picture I could not ignore, but I am a patient man. Helen used to say I was the only person she knew who could outweigh a stone, so I waited. I watched, I said nothing, and the situation got worse. Grace stopped calling on Sundays. She missed Eleanor's doctor appointment in May, something she had never missed before. When I phoned, Victor answered. He said Grace was busy. He said it pleasantly. He said she would call back. She did not call back for 9 days. Then came the night everything detonated. June 14th, a Wednesday. I remember because Eleanor always watched her game show on Wednesday evenings, and she was in her recliner in the living room of her small house on Maple Lane when she stood up to get a glass of water and her hip gave out. She went down hard on the kitchen tile. She managed to reach the phone on the counter. She called me first. "Dad," she said, and her voice was thin with pain. "I fell. I cannot get up. I am on the floor. My blood turned to ice water. Mom, stay right there. I am coming." I called Grace immediately. I called my daughter, the woman who had brought flowers to her mother's grave every single month, the woman who used to drive 2 hours to take Eleanor to the eye doctor because she did not trust anyone else to do it. Grace picked up on the fourth ring. Her voice was strange, flat. "Dad, I cannot right now." "Mom fell, Grace. She is on the kitchen floor. She cannot get up. I need you to meet me there." A pause, a long, hollow pause. Then Victor's voice in the background, muffled but clear enough. "She is not our responsibility. Tell him to handle it." And then my daughter, my Grace, my only child, the girl who had Helen's eyes and Helen's heart, said the words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Dad, you are going to have to figure it out yourself. She is your mother." The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked. Bo sat at my feet, looking up at me with his big, dumb, trusting eyes. The coffee maker dripped. Everything in the house was the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, but everything was different. I drove to Eleanor's house in 7 minutes. I found her on the kitchen floor, exactly where she said she would be, lying on her side with her hand pressed against the cold tile. She was wearing her housecoat and her slippers. and the glass of water she had been reaching for was sitting on the counter, 3 feet above her, untouched. I got down on the floor beside her. "I am here, Mom." She looked up at me with those sharp, clear eyes, and even in pain, even lying on a kitchen floor at 82 years old, she managed to say, "Well, it took you long enough." I almost smiled. Almost. I called an ambulance. They took her to St. Catherine's in Knoxville. Bruised hip, no fracture, thank God. But Dr. Mitchell said she would need physical therapy and home care for at least 6 weeks. She could not live alone during recovery. I sat in the waiting room after they settled her. Plastic chair, fluorescent lights, the smell of floor cleaner and something metallic underneath it. I pulled out my phone. No messages from Grace. Not one. Not "Is she okay?" Not "I am sorry." Not anything. Before I continue this story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one of them. Knowing you are out there, that you care about these stories, is what keeps me telling them. I brought Eleanor home to my house, not hers, mine, because my house had a ground floor bedroom and a walk-in shower and a kitchen where I could keep an eye on her while she pretended she did not need it. I set her up in the guest room. Clean sheets, her own pillow from Maple Lane, the crossword book from her nightstand, her reading glasses, her small wooden radio that she had owned since 1973. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around like she was inspecting a hotel. "This will do," she said. "I am glad it meets your standards." She looked at me. "Where is Grace?" The question landed like a stone in still water. I did not lie to my mother. I had never lied to my mother. "She is busy, Mom." I said it the same way Grace had said it to me. And my mother, 82 years old, sharper than any person I had ever known, looked at me with an expression that told me she knew exactly what busy meant. She nodded once. Then she opened her crossword book. 3 days passed. I took care of Eleanor. I cooked her meals. I drove her to physical therapy at the clinic on Broad Street. I helped her with her exercises in the living room while Bo watched from the couch like a concerned supervisor. She complained about everything. The coffee was too weak. The pillows were too flat. The television was too loud. She complained with the energy of a woman who intended to live another 20 years out of pure stubbornness, and I loved every second of it. Grace did not call, not once in 3 days. On the 4th day, Eleanor sat me down at the kitchen table. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink. The same window Helen used to stand in front of while she washed the dishes, humming hymns she did not know she was humming. Thomas. My mother used my full name. That meant something was coming. I looked at her. She had her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. Her eyes were steady and clear. "I am not a fool," she said. "I know what happened." I did not ask what she meant. She told me. Grace did not come because Victor told her not to. I stayed quiet. "I have watched that man for 8 months," she said. "I have watched him smile with his whole face and mean nothing with any of it. I have watched my granddaughter shrink. Her voice did not waver. Her voice never wavered. I have watched her stop calling, stop visiting, stop being Grace. And I have waited because I thought it was not my place. But I am 82 years old and I fell on my kitchen floor and my granddaughter told her father to figure it out. So I am done waiting." She looked at me over the rim of her mug. "What are you going to do?" I looked at my mother, this woman who had survived my father's death, a hip replacement, 12 years of living alone on a fixed income. This woman who had never once asked me for anything, who had sat in the back of a car with her hand in mine after Helen died and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. You can always tell who a person really is by how they treat someone who cannot do a single thing for them. Helen's words, my mother's proof. That night, after Eleanor went to bed, I went to the bedroom closet, top shelf, behind the winter blankets, a green footlocker with a brass latch. I had not opened it in 6 years. Inside were things most people in Millbrook would not have believed belonged to the quiet man who fixed screen doors. A bronze star, a meritorious service medal, a photograph of me shaking hands with a man whose name still appears in classified briefings, 26 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, 14 of those years in places that do not appear on public maps. I was not a handyman. I was an intelligence officer who spent more than 2 decades identifying threats, reading human behavior, and building cases that could not be denied. I was trained to be patient, to observe, to wait until every piece was in place before I moved. And Victor Drake had no idea who he was dealing with. I closed the footlocker. I did not need the medals. I needed the training. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed Helen had died in, and I heard her voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. You can always tell who a person really is. I know, Helen, I said to the empty room. I know. I spent the next 3 weeks doing what I had spent 26 years learning to do. I gathered information, quietly, methodically. I made phone calls to old colleagues. I requested public records. I drove to Nashville twice and sat in county clerk offices reading documents that most people would not know to ask for. I was not angry. Anger is a young man's fuel. I was precise. What I found was confirming. Victor Allen Drake had 3 prior business partnerships that ended in litigation. 2 former partners had filed fraud complaints. His real estate licenses in 2 states had been suspended and reinstated under conditions that suggested cooperation rather than innocence. He had a pattern. Taking control, isolating the people closest to him, and using their resources until there was nothing left. He was not building a life with my daughter. He was positioning himself. I had everything I needed. I called Grace on a Saturday morning. I kept my voice light. I told her Eleanor was doing better. I told her I wanted to host a family dinner the following weekend, a reunion. Nothing fancy, just the people who mattered. She hesitated. I could hear Victor in the background asking who it was. She said she would check and call me back. She called back 2 hours later and said they would come. Something in her voice sounded like the Grace I used to know, small and far away, but there. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. I had no idea that before the night was over, everything would change. I cooked Helen's pot roast, the recipe from the card in the box, the one that called for a slow braise and more garlic than any reasonable person would use. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table and supervised with the intensity of a woman who had been cooking for 60 years and did not trust anyone else's seasoning. Robert and Anna drove down from Virginia. Martin from the Veterans Group came. Clinton Hale, who had served with me in places we did not discuss, sat in the corner drinking bourbon and watching the door the way we had both been trained to watch doors. Grace and Victor arrived at 6:15. He wore a blazer. She wore a dress and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Victor shook my hand the way he always did. Firm, performative, like a man who had read a book about handshakes. "Good to see you, Thomas," he said. "Beautiful spread." He looked around the house with that appraising gaze, the gaze that calculated value instead of meaning. Dinner was warm and loud and almost normal. Eleanor told her county fair story. Robert made his terrible jokes. Martin talked about the trout he caught last spring that got bigger every time he told it. Even Grace laughed a few times. Real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep. I watched Victor through all of it, smiling, charming, complimenting the food, pouring wine for Anna, playing the part. I had seen men like him in rooms in 6 different countries. The performance was always flawless. Until it was not. After dessert, we moved to the living room. I waited until the coffee was poured, until everyone was settled, until Victor was leaned back in his chair with the posture of a man who believed he was the most important person in the room. Then I spoke. Before we finish up tonight, I said, "I want to tell you all something." The room went quiet. Not nervous quiet, expectant quiet. Victor smiled, the easy smile, the comfortable smile. Grace looked at me with curiosity. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. She knew. I do not know how, but she knew. "Most of you know me as the man who fixes things around Millbrook," I said. "Some of you know me a little better than that." I looked at Clinton. He nodded. What most of you do not know is that I spent 26 years as an intelligence officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I served in 14 countries. I held a top secret clearance for the entirety of my career. I was trained to identify deception, to assess threats, and to build cases based on observable behavior and documented evidence. The room was absolutely silent. Grace stared at me, her mouth opened slightly. Victor's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes shifted. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I retired 12 years ago, I continued. I came home. I married the love of my life, raised my daughter, and tried to live quietly. But the training does not go away. You do not stop seeing patterns just because you stop being paid to see them. I turned to look at Victor directly. I looked at him the way I had looked at subjects in windowless rooms in buildings that do not have names. Calm, patient, absolutely certain. Victor, I said, I have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing your business history, your licensing records in Tennessee and Georgia, the fraud complaints filed by Martin Hale and David Chen, your former partners, the suspension of your brokerage license in 2019, the settlement you signed in 2021 with a non-disclosure clause you have been violating since the day you met my daughter. The color left his face the way water leaves a cracked glass. Slowly and completely, I did not stop. I also know about the financial accounts you opened in my daughter's name without her full understanding. I know about the lease you signed using her credit. I know about the insurance policy change you filed 6 weeks ago. I have documentation for all of it. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The room was so still I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Eleanor, 82 years old, bruised hip, sitting in the recliner with her coffee, looked at Victor Allen Drake and said one word. Well, Grace was staring at her hands. They were shaking. She looked up at me with tears running down her face, and in that moment, she did not look like a grown woman. She looked like the little girl who used to run to me when thunder scared her. Daddy. She said it so quietly I almost did not hear it. I am here, Grace. I have always been here. Victor stood up. His hands were trembling. He tugged at his blazer like the fabric had suddenly become too tight. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. Clinton stood up from the corner. Not threatening, just present. Just 6 feet 2 inches of former military intelligence standing quietly between Victor and the door. Victor looked around the room at Robert, at Anna, at Martin, at Eleanor, at me. Every single face looked back at him with the same expression. We see you. The mask fell. It did not crash. It just slid off the way a held breath finally releases. And underneath it was not a monster. It was a small, frightened, ordinary man who had spent his entire life pretending to be something bigger than he was and had finally run out of room. He sat back down. He put his face in his hands, and then he said something I did not expect. I am sorry. 2 words. Quiet, cracked, real. I am not saying those words fixed anything. They did not. But they were the first honest thing I had heard him say since the night he told me about the apartment in Memphis. And that, at least, was a start. Grace left with me that night. She did not go back to the apartment in Knoxville. She stayed in Millbrook. She stayed in the room where she grew up, with the window that looked out at the same oaks she used to climb as a child. She cried for 3 days. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep you did not know it was there until it started coming out. Eleanor sat with her. They did crossword puzzles together. They drank chamomile tea. They talked about Helen. They talked about the recipe cards. They talked about everything and nothing, the way women do when they are rebuilding something that was almost destroyed. Weeks passed. Grace found an apartment in Knoxville, a small place near the river with good light and a balcony. She got a new position at a different firm. She started calling on Sundays again. She brought flowers to her mother's grave on the 1st of the month. She came back, not all at once, the way a creek comes back after a drought, slowly, finding its old path again. Eleanor healed. Her hip got stronger. She went back to Maple Lane, back to her recliner and her game shows and her crossword puzzles. She made pot roast on Sundays and called me if I was 5 minutes late. She was, in every way that mattered, exactly herself. I joined the Veterans Breakfast Group at the Pinewood Diner Tuesday mornings. 7 men who had served in places they rarely discussed, eating scrambled eggs and telling stories that would make civilians uncomfortable and each other laugh. Clinton always ordered the same thing: black coffee and silence. We understood each other the way only men who have carried certain weights can. One Sunday afternoon in October, Grace came for dinner. She brought a pie she had baked herself using Helen's recipe, the one with the lattice crust that took 45 minutes to get right. She set it on the counter and looked at me. "I talked to Victor," she said. My hands paused on the dish towel. "He is in counseling," she said. "Real counseling. Not the kind where you sit for an hour and tell someone what they want to hear." She was quiet for a moment. "I am not going back to him," she said. "That is not what this is about. He asked me to tell you that he is sorry. Not for getting caught, for who he became." I folded the towel, set it on the counter, looked at my daughter, this woman who had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's spine and a strength that no man would ever take from her again. "Okay," I said. That is all I needed to say. Eleanor came into the kitchen. She looked at the pie. She looked at Grace. She looked at me. "Who made this?" "Grace did," I said. Eleanor leaned forward and inspected the lattice with the focus of a quality control inspector at a munitions factory. She straightened up. "Acceptable," she said. And then, so faintly you would miss it if you blinked, she smiled. "When I was young, I believed strength was about what you could endure, how much weight you could carry, how long you could last before you broke. The military taught me that strength was about precision, about knowing when to act and how to act and having the discipline to wait until the moment was right. But aging taught me the truth. Real strength is not what you do when you are powerful. Real strength is what you do when someone you love is on a kitchen floor and the person who should care the most tells you to figure it out yourself. Real strength is showing up anyway, every single time, without condition, without keeping score. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it reminded you of someone who showed up for you when nobody else would, or someone who loved you so quietly you almost missed it, share it with them. Send it to the person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story. And leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most find them because someone like you passed them along. Helen was right. She was always right. You can always tell who a person really is by how they treat someone who cannot do a single thing for them. Eleanor proved it. Grace remembered it. And I will carry it with me for whatever years I have left, sitting on this porch, drinking my coffee, watching the oaks turn copper in the Tennessee light, with Bo at my feet and Helen's voice in my ear and the knowledge that the things that really matter do not break. They just wait for you to be strong enough to hold them again.